Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh Fullerton.
My name's Morgan Jeffrey.
And this week, in a very appropriately Doctor Who kind of thing, you'd hope it would be every week, but this week we're talking about time, specifically the amount of time doctors spend in the roles, or actors playing doctors. So this is a bit spurred off by something that was going around on social media. There was this rumour, unconfirmed, not from any particular source, that Jodie Whittaker and Chris Chibnall were going to stay on in the series for a few more years. Possibly true, possibly not true. I think it's one of those things where it's like, yes, that is maybe true by default because they might, but I don't think it's been officially decided.
They certainly might, yes.
Yeah, but the thing it kind of did inspire in us was thinking about that would mean that, Jodie Whittaker would be doing the role for, another 2 or 3 years, which would put her quite a long time in the role. And then we started thinking about other doctors and how long they stayed in the role. Because obviously some doctors do it very quickly, like your Christopher Ecclestons or your Paul McGanns, although that latter one is a bit of a point of contention, as we'll discuss. And some, your Tom Bakers and David Tennants do it for quite a long time. It's quite interesting, isn't it, Morgan? I mean, do you think... You said to me earlier that Patrick Troughton once said that he thought about 3 years or 3 series, or not 3 series, but, was about right?
Yeah. So reportedly, Patrick Troughton said that 3 years in the role was the optimum amount of time to avoid typecasting. And he apparently passed along this advice to Peter Davison when he took on the role. Peter Davison asked him for advice, and that was the one piece of advice he gave. And Peter Davison indeed left the role after a little under 3 years on the screen. I'm not sure I agree with Patrick Troughton, which is not a sentence I expected to ever say. I think, as you say, there have been some doctors who have had shorter runs and others who have had much longer runs. I don't think anyone has done it for too long. Which even Tom Baker himself, I interviewed Tom Baker once and asked him if he thought he had stayed too long, or even if he regrets leaving, if he wishes he'd stayed longer. And he actually said he thinks he stayed one series 1 year too long. He said at the time that what he should have done, looking back, he played that role for 6 years. He was very possessive of the role and the character. But what he should have done is when John Nathan Turner, the new producer, had come in to kind of give Doctor Who a fresh look of paint in the 1980s, he should have stood aside then, ahead of season 18, and let John just kind of totally put his stamp on the show. But I think, if anything, certain Doctors, it would have been great to see their eras extended, but I don't think anyone's played it for too long.
I mean, the one that kind of jumps out to me there is there's a couple of examples. You mentioned Tom Baker did it for nearly 7 years. So Peter Capaldi did it for pretty much exactly 4 years, which is great. And I remember definitely I had this feeling when it was announced in, I think, 2016 in January that Peter Capaldi was leaving, and we already knew Stephen Moffat was going. And it kind of was a bit like, are we going to be, there wasn't a series in 2016. It was kind of like, are we going to be that excited we're going to be waiting essentially for like 2 years for the new Doctor Who we're all excited about, with the new showrunner, with the new Doctor who we didn't know at the time. Is this last series for Peter Capaldi and Stephen Moffat going to be a bit of a lame duck? Maybe he should just go. But actually, brilliant episodes in that series. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that was actually the series where Peter Capaldi really nailed it. It's kind of sad that on the flip side that he didn't get more time in the role. But also, I think maybe knowing that was coming, that the end was coming, made for kind of a stronger series for him. And then, I mean, there's a question about whether it should have ended on The Doctor Falls or Twice Upon a Time. But, I feel like Twice Upon a Time has some faults, but I feel like the ending it gives Peter Capaldi's Doctor is quite nice. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it kind of works. And by the end, I feel like I was a lot fonder of that Doctor, partly because I knew it was coming to an end, the other way around. And the flip side of that is David Tennant. Obviously, he stayed more or less, depending on how you count it, the second longest, intentionally, apparently, trying to beat Peter Davison and a couple of the other older Doctors. Couldn't beat Tom Baker, but he did about 4 years, 5 months-ish, depending on if you count it from his very first appearance in The Parting of the Ways or in The Christmas Invasion. But the thing I will always remember is Stephen Moffat kind of revealed some of his ideas, because there was a moment where David Tennant was going to stay for 1 more year. And, as much as I kind of feel like there's an argument that David Tennant could have left at the end of, Journey's End, because that kind of felt like a natural end. Then we had that year of specials. Some of the specials I really like, but still. But the other side of that is that, David Tennant could have stayed that extra year, and Stephen Moffat's idea for that series sounded really cool. You start with the 10th Doctor regenerating, and then you kind of jump back and sort of see what led up to that. These are obviously ideas that he used in different ways with Matt Smith anyway. But there's part of me that's like, God, we were denied a really cool era of Doctor Who with the most popular Doctor in recent times, and Stephen Moffat kind of doing his sort of first year, probably best arc stuff with that. And I'm kind of like, that's a shame. But then again, I'm flipping this so many times, it's basically, a slinky. It's like we wouldn't have had Matt Smith's first year, and maybe we wouldn't have had Matt Smith because maybe he would have moved on or something else. So it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to sort of lay this out.
Well, there are lots of comparisons to be made between Tom Baker and David Tennant, not least because, as you mentioned, they're the two longest serving Doctors, but also they were arguably sort of both the Doctor when Doctor Who was at various sort of heights in terms of its popularity. And where Tom was saying he wishes he had left 1 year earlier and kind of gone out with the Graham Williams era and not sort of been a hangover into the John Nathan Turner era of Doctor Who. Although it's certainly interesting to consider what would Series 5 have been like with David Tennant in the lead. Actually, it may have felt a little bit like it would have been slightly strange, I think, for David Tennant, who was so associated with the Russell T Davies style of Doctor Who, to have hung around for just one more. If he had continued on for who knows how long, but if he had just hung over into Series 5, and then in Series 6, Stephen Moffat has to sort of restart his era again with a new Doctor. I think it was, as much as I love David Tennant's Doctor, I think it was for the best that Stephen Moffat was able to do what John Nathan Turner wasn't able to do, which is not only give the show a kind of cosmetic and stylistic refresh, but also start afresh with a new Doctor.
Definitely. I mean, there was also talk of Peter Capaldi staying on with Chris Chibnall, I think. I think the BBC asked him to. He certainly said that when we asked him about it. And, you kind of feel like that feels like that would have been strange as well. Given what Chris Chibnall has kind of done with the show, it's certainly very different to what it was before. And I feel like if Peter Capaldi's still in it, it would have been very, very different take. I mean, you wouldn't have, obviously, for very obvious reasons, it would have been a very different take. But certain stories would look quite the same.
I would love though Peter Capaldi's Doctor to be saying "my fam." That could be that would have been incredible. But no, I think Series 10 is a really interesting example where most Doctor Who fans agree that the Peter Capaldi Doctor and Pearl Mackie as Bill were a really nice partnership, and it was a shame that we didn't get more of them. But I think it always works best to have a new showrunner come in with a new Doctor, a Doctor of their own. I would have only wanted more from the Capaldi Doctor and Bill if it had been under Stephen Moffat. It wouldn't have made sense for Capaldi to continue on with.
Yeah, I get what you mean. There is this kind of creative partnerships that you see in the show, which you can't quite separate when you're talking about doctors moving on and actors moving on. You kind of do in the classic series and in the modern series. You pair these writers with these, with these doctors, and it's kind of you kind of have to take that into consideration. I mean, one thing I will say, slightly turning back a moment, Christopher Eccleston's an interesting one because he is, depending on how you count it with Paul McGann, I think you can probably say Christopher Eccleston, barring your guest doctors, your war doctors, Christopher Eccleston is pretty much the least long-serving Doctor.
It depends how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it in terms of time in situ, but in terms of being the incumbent Doctor, he was certainly the incumbent lead actor Doctor for the shortest period of time. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Yeah, because even when Paul McGann, even if you kind of just count as, it's difficult because we were saying before, Paul McGann's funny. He kind of breaks the whole system. It's very Doctor Who because he kind of is after himself.
Paul McGann is either, depending on how you look at it, either the shortest serving Doctor or the longest serving Doctor, because if you just count the TV movie, he was only the Doctor for one night. If you count the TV movie to Rose in 2005, then he was the Doctor for just shy of 9 years. And you could even technically count from the TV movie to when you see Paul McGann regenerated the Night of the Doctor in 2013, which is something like 17 and a half years. So it depends how you look at it.
Yeah, it kind of depends.
Timey-wimey.
Yeah, and it depends, Big Finish and stuff like that. Because the thing is, it wasn't like Paul McGann was just sitting around all that time. He was being the Doctor. He was playing him in audio dramas, and he was, people were drawing him as the comic book lead, and he was in books and this, that, and the other. Do you know what I mean? It does carry on. So Christopher Eccleston, I am kind of interested in that because I am sort of that feels like a kind of almost a perfect season of Doctor Who, and kind of not in a mean way, you sort of feel like Christopher Eccleston's Doctor fills his purpose in that role, in that he kind of introduces it and then also introduces regeneration. It kind of basically does the whole show in one season. But I am also like, it's one of these weird things where I'm like, obviously the David Tennant era was like super popular. I really enjoyed it. But as part of me, it's like, I mean, what if series 2 of Christopher Eccleston was the best ever, you know, and it kind of just took the show to new heights? Like, we just don't know. And then you start to think about that and you're like, and then maybe David Tennant wasn't free. And then maybe, you know, Chiwetel Ejiofor got the call and was the Doctor. And you're like, would that have been better? Would it just been different? I don't know. Would we still have the pating? You know, that's the question.
It's always that way with Doctor Who. There's so many potentially interesting forks in the road, but with each of them you lose something as well as potentially gaining something. It's the so like if David Tennant had stuck around for series 5, we potentially would never have had Matt Smith as the Doctor, and similarly if Christopher Eccleston had stuck around for another series, we wouldn't have had David Tennant maybe as the Doctor. And I interviewed Paul McGann once and asked him, you know, if he wishes that it had gone on to a series. Now looking back on it, how does he feel about it? And he sort of very graciously said that when fans come to him and say, we wish you'd done a series, he sort of says to them, well, you know, part of me wishes that, but also if I had done that, the series would have gone on a different trajectory and you never would have had Eccleston or Tennant or Smith or all these Doctors and all this Doctor Who that you love. So there's always two ways to look at it.
It's not fixed point in time.
It's very much not. No, it's in flux.
I will say quickly before we move on to the next bit, I might just do a quick rundown of the Doctors, how long they're in the roles, in case anyone is listening, and wants to find out. So at the top, we've got, these numbers might be slightly off depending on when you listen to it and depending on whether we've got them right. But Tom Baker, at time of speaking, is about, well, it's the same for him, but he was in the role for about 6 years 9 months, which a lot of people round up to 7 years. David Tennant was in the role for about 4 years 6 months, if you count from his very first appearance. John Pertwee was 4 years 5 months. Peter Capaldi, then at number 4, was exactly 4 years, so he was in the role slightly longer than Matt Smith, who was just after him at 3 years 11 months 3 weeks 3 days, which is quite nice. The funny thing about Matt Smith, incidentally, is that he kind of has the opposite issue to David Tennant, in that David Tennant kind of took over the role Christmas 2005. I mean, technically from summer, but you know, he takes it from then, and then he leaves on New Year's Day 2010. So it looks like he was in the role for 5 years, but really he was in the role for about 4 years and a week, where he was the lead. You know, it was Matt Smith was obviously kind of the opposite of that, in that it looks like 3 years, 2010 to 2013, but it was basically almost 4 years. 4. Yeah, it's really strange. Anyway, so after Matt Smith is Peter Davison, who did 2 years 11 months, almost 3. William Hartnell, 2 years 11 months. I should say Morgan wrote these notes, and he's written Hartnell not through choice, 2 years 11 months. Colin Baker was at number 8, 2 years 8 months. Patrick Troughton at number 9, 2 years 7 months. It's interesting, actually. A lot of them do sort of stick for the 3-year rule that you mentioned earlier.
And it's interesting as well that Colin Baker is often held up as one of the Doctors who got short shrift, and yet was actually not, you know, he didn't appear in as many episodes, as many stories, but was the incumbent Doctor for longer than Patrick Troughton, who is often held up as one of the, you know, the all-time great classic Doctors who absolutely got a full run of things. Yeah,
definitely. Right after Patrick Troughton at number 10, we've got Jodie Whittaker, who is, I believe, at time of speaking, done about 2 years 7 months, and we know that there's at least another year in her Doctor, because they're doing another series in 2021. So we could, I mean, who knows what will happen with coronavirus and things like that. You could technically preemptively push Jodie Whittaker up, and she will probably beat Peter Davison at least, and could crack the top 5. You know, she'll be pretty close. And then our bottom 3 are Sylvester McCoy, who only did 2 years 2 months,
or 8 years 8 months, depending how you look at it.
That's true. Fair point. In which case he's number 2 after Paul McGann. And then Christopher Eccleston, who did 2 months 3 weeks ish, and Paul McGann, who either did one night 8 years, or 9 years, or 17 years. So yeah, as you can see, it's complicated. We need to make a graph basically with different colours, like little TARDISes that rise up, and there's like a blue TARDIS that's the main when you're the incumbent Doctor. There's like a little purple TARDIS. Thing is though, then you start counting out, and you start thinking, well, David Tennant's just doing some new stuff with Tom Baker as we speak. They're recording new stuff for Big Finish. I mean, that kind of, does that count? And that kind of brings me to what I wanted to talk about. Does anyone stop being the Doctor? I mean, obviously they always, kind of carry that role around with them, but also sometimes these days they carry on playing the character, which I think must be quite strange. You kind of do say this big goodbye, in David Tennant's case, to the Doctor, and then you're back in Big Finish saying allons-y again,
Yeah, no, it throws those neat brackets of eras entirely out of whack now. There's the fact that it's not just the fact that those characters, those Doctors are appearing in comic strips and books, but the actors are actively playing them again. Tom Baker is still playing the Doctor. Peter Davison, Colin Baker, Sylvester, Paul McGann, they're all still playing the Doctor. So you don't ever really stop being the Doctor, and I don't just mean that in a kind of, oh, isn't that nice? You're always a Doctor way. Like literally, they are still playing that character to date. So this whole idea of their era, appropriate enough for a show like Doctor Who, doesn't really work because those actors are still appearing now in new stories as their versions of the Doctor. And
as much as you might be like, well, then there's still Christopher Eccleston who still hasn't played the Doctor again. One day he might change his mind, and that'll just ruin that as well. He'll just decide, oh yeah, no, I'm going to do the 60th anniversary, or I'm going to do some Big Finish thing. I mean, actually that's the point with David Tennant. We didn't have that in our notes, but you could count his era up to the Day of the Doctor as well, right?
Yeah, no, good point, because he and indeed every Doctor for when they come back in a multi-Doctor story on TV. But I think
ruins everything.
I think we're always happy to see more of each Doctor, or hear more. And I think that's because, as I say, I don't think any Doctor has stuck around too long, and I think it does depend as well on the Doctor, because some Doctors, as I think I've said in a previous episode, some Doctors emerge sort of fully formed, and the way in which that actor plays the Doctor remains more or less unchanged throughout their tenure. But then others do change and develop quite considerably, or at least you get the sense that they would have. So I think one of the reasons, again, going back to Peter Capaldi, and a lot of fans say, oh, it would have been great for him to stay on for one more series, is because his Doctor does change a lot across his time on the show. You have this kind of this sort of slightly more sour, more distant, am I a good man? You have that in Series 8, and then you have the kind of aging space hippie playing his electric guitar in Series 9. And then in Series 10, you have something that just feels, I don't even know how to describe it, but just sort of like classic Doctor. It just feels like he's really finally got a grasp on exactly what he wants to do, and then he's gone. So it almost feels like Peter Capaldi got short shrift, even though he played the role for 4 years. And then Colin Baker, who, as I said, he was technically the incumbent for longer than Patrick Troughton, but because his Doctor was going on more of a character arc, it felt like that was cut off kind of mid-flow, and that's something that has been explored in Big Finish, where his characters become more mellow. And then Peter Davison is an interesting one, sort of going back to what you were saying again about Capaldi, about how yes, Series 10 was great, but was it only great because it was his final series? A lot of people say, oh, Peter Davison's amazing in The Caves of Androzani. That's his best performance. And it probably is, but is it so good because it's his last one?
Yeah, so exactly.
It's not to say that, like, and he's great beforehand as well, but Caves is probably his best, but because it's his last. And he wouldn't have been able to maybe maintain that intensity of performance throughout a whole series if he'd stuck around for a fourth year. And then Tom Baker, who's the longest running of all, stayed around for 7 years, is arguably the one that you could look at, I guess, and go, oh, he stayed for 7 years. That's a long time. Did he stay too long? But then I think what's interesting there is you get to see, again, all different sort of facets of his Doctor. You get to see, so he starts off one way, he sort of goes far more kind of wild and comic and manic in the middle there in the Graham Williams era, and then possibly because he's realised he stayed on for a series too long and is a bit miserable. But actually, in his final series, it's really interesting because you get a slightly more morose, more restrained performance from Tom Baker. So you get to see all these different sides to his Doctor. So I never got bored with his Doctor, even though he's in by far the most amount of episodes.
Definitely. I mean, the thing you said there about when people when things feel natural from a storytelling perspective. Weirdly, as much as I would have liked to see more of Christopher Eccleston, it didn't feel like we were cut short because it was, you know, written in that he left. Do you know what I mean? Like, as in, it was
Yeah.
like, I know it sounds really daft, but like, obviously they knew he was going to leave by the time they were writing the finale, or by the time they were writing the production script anyway. I'm not quite sure on the timings. But so, you know, they were able to write in this sort of grand exit for him, and it kind of worked. Like, the arc of that series worked with the one and done Doctor, as you'd say.
Yeah.
And so then even someone like Peter Capaldi, who was there for way longer, you can weirdly feel more like he was shortchanged than someone who barely had like a couple of months in the role.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if a Doctor, you know, arrived on the scene now and left after one series, that would feel crazy. You'd be like, wow, that was just a blip. But as you say, because Christopher Eccleston was the first, it didn't feel. Well, I do remember when it was announced that he was leaving after one series, it was quite shocking. But at the time, but it kind of works perfectly, as you say, because it was, being the one-off Doctor, he was the one that relaunched the show. And I think even Russell T Davies has said that while it wasn't the plan, it is perfect because, as you say, you get to introduce the concept of regeneration, which is the one great kind of tenet of Doctor Who that hadn't been explored up to that point. Series 1 gets to tick off that box.
It's basically quite like the TV movie in a strange sort of way, where it is always odd when you watch the TV movie and like Sylvester McCoy's in it for a bit as the Doctor, and then he just gets shot, and then there's this new guy. Like, it must be very strange to watch. Whereas with a TV show, you can have a character who you get to know and who then changes and does it like that. But like, I think that is the thing when you're trying to relaunch Doctor Who, you kind of want to, you know, get regeneration in there. So I feel like weirdly, if you'd had Christopher Eccleston for 3 years and then we're like, okay, now we're going to regenerate, it might have been harder for that idea to kind of be accepted and for that idea to bed in.
And also, and this is no comment whatsoever on either Christopher Eccleston or David Tennant as actors, because I think they're both fantastic, very different, but both fantastic. No pun intended. But I think Christopher Eccleston was the perfect actor to relaunch Doctor Who in the sense of, and his Doctor was the perfect Doctor to relaunch Doctor Who in the sense of no one was taking Doctor Who seriously at the time. The tabloids were saying, who's going to play Doctor Who? Paul Daniels.
Yeah.
No, you had Christopher Eccleston, who was famously a very serious actor, and he showed up with, you know, the shaved head and the leather jacket, and it was like, okay, this is, you know, I mean, it's still Doctor Who, it's still fun family drama, but it's a bit more serious than people are giving it credit for. But would that have been the right actor, the right Doctor to then launch Doctor Who into kind of the stratosphere? Maybe not. I think then I don't know if David Tennant would have had the sort of the star power, and I don't know if his sort of lighter Doctor would have worked to re-establish the series, but then I don't know if Christopher Eccleston's Doctor would have worked to take it to the next level. I think you needed both of them. You needed Eccleston slightly more serious at the start, and then you needed Tennant, once it was established, someone slightly lighter, a bit more of a romantic lead to kind of take it to the next level. I think you needed both, and neither could have done the job that the other one did.
Definitely. I mean, it's also, you know, with retrospect, we can say, oh yeah, it all worked out perfectly as it is. You know, whereas actually, you know, David Tennant's one series launch of Doctor Who was like even better, and Christopher Eccleston has been doing it for,
who knows,
you know, for 15 years now, and everyone's very happy. You know, like you never know. But no, you're right. It is interesting. I am also struck, by the way, by thinking back to all the stuff about how Tom Baker's been doing it for either 6 years or like 20, depending on how you count it. It's very like when we were talking about canon and how it all fits together or doesn't fit together. Like, it feels like Doctor Who's kind of, I don't want to say, it's in kind of a strange relationship with its fans, where the fans are constantly trying to sort of like lay everything out and put things in lists, and then Doctor Who say, guess what? This guy's actually been doing it for 20 years. It's just meaningless what you've just said. Shut up. And then Doctor Who goes, no, my data is so important. Like, no, actually, guess what? It counts because he was in the Day of the Doctor. Twist.
Well, no, but speaking of the Day of the Doctor, like the War Doctor is the perfect example of that, where the idea of inserting a secret Doctor, a Doctor that you never knew existed, is actually creatively a really exciting story, rich with potential. But even when I first heard it, all I thought was like, my reference books. I'm gonna have to like take a red pen to all my books. No, he's not. He's now not the 9th Doctor. Now he's the 10th Doctor, and everything gets bumped up one. Oh, what a nightmare!
I bought this T-shirt with all the Doctors' names on it. What, I'm gonna look like a loser now.
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah, exactly. I've got that T-shirt that says Hartnell and Troughton and Pertwee, and it doesn't have Hurt on it. Now I'm gonna look dumb.
Yeah, people aren't gonna think I'm cool anymore. No, I know. It is funny, and I think, you know, getting back to the main topic, it's kind of nice that in a way there's something kind of really, I don't know, really kind of fun about the idea that while Doctors leave, they never really leave, and obviously the actors have said, you know, they kind of do feel like it follows you around, like you play the Doctor for like a video message or to like speak to a fan or whatever like that. You know, you go to conventions and hold a sonic screwdriver, things like that. You're an ambassador forever.
And Christopher Eccleston has never officially played the role again, but he has recorded in-character messages for people's weddings and things like that. So he's clearly proud of the legacy of having played the part. And does that count? Does that mean he's still playing the Doctor?
I think so.
Spiritually, kind of.
Well, it's a bit like, you know, James Bonds are always kind of James Bond, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? Like, no matter what Roger Moore, you know, did otherwise, you were always like, well, there's James Bond walking down the road, you know. And it's kind of, I feel like it's a little different for some people in that role. But with Doctor Who, it's kind of like, you know, it's a hell of a responsibility. Like, it must be really difficult because, you know, when Jodie Whittaker does leave and goes on to kind of do other stuff, it's still going to be have that following her around. Like, arguably David Tennant, he's done loads of stuff since, but it's probably as big as he ever was. You know, like that's. I mean, it's a little different for Matt Smith because of things like The Crown, which is kind of different. But, you know, kind of Doctor Who is such a sort of stratospheric level of fame from within quite a small kind of area of TV. And then it's not surprising that it kind of dominates your life. But then also there's someone else doing it, you know, like David Tennant and Matt Smith both got a bit irritated by Alex Kingston acting alongside other doctors. You know, they were like, that's my wife. But, you know, and that's the thing, the show carries on without you, but also it brings you with it. Like, you're kind of, no matter what else he does, Christopher Eccleston is always going to be asked about Doctor Who, a show he hasn't been on for 15 years. So, you know, while he was on it, as we've said, he was the incumbent Doctor for 2 months, he filmed on it for like less than a year. Will be asked about it probably for the rest of his life, you know?
Yeah, and I think David Tennant has said two things which are both very applicable here, which is he's often said that Doctor Who is strange in the sense of as soon as you accept that role, the first sentence of your obituary is already written.
Yes, so that's a great way of putting
it's always
it,
the star of Doctor Who. You will always be the star of Doctor Who. But David Tennant has also, so in many ways, like you say, you never stop being the Doctor. But David Tennant has also said that when he was filming his regeneration scene, he sort of, you know, did the moment. Matt was brought on, literally wearing his clothes, and then they just sort of escorted David Tennant off set, and Matt was just there and taking charge. And it was like, oh, is that it? Oh, okay, I guess bye. I guess he's the Doctor now. So it's both really sort of what's the word? Sort of like transitionary, like in the sense of you're the Doctor for a time and then you leave and someone else takes over. But it's also very permanent in the sense of you are the Doctor forever.
It's strange, isn't it? Like, you feel like someone like Peter Capaldi, who was always such a great ambassador for the show, he's been in a couple of things since, but he's not been in loads of stuff. People are still going to be thinking, oh yeah, it's Doctor Who. There's the Doctor walking down the street. And, you know, he left the show 3 years ago, longer from his perspective. But it is still like, when you see Peter Capaldi, you're like, oh yeah, Doctor Who. It's funny. And, you know, it must be a difficult choice sometimes to take it on because you know it's going to follow you around forever. And that can be a really positive thing. And, you know, it's been great for someone like Tom Baker to be able to still be acting and kind of bringing joy to people at an advanced age. Not that he wouldn't have before, but, you know, it's easier because something like Doctor Who is out there for him to do audio dramas and to kind of, you know, like Scratchman, the book and things like that, which just kind of keep on giving back to fans. And that's a really positive side to it. But yeah, I'm sure it's incredibly frustrating for someone like David Tennant. Every single week he's promoting his, you know, gritty new drama about this, you know, guy on the edge. I mean, people are like, hey, what's your favourite TARDIS, David? Tell us about the TARDIS.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is something that everyone has to accept, that it's a job not just for 3 years. It is a job for life, one way or another. Whether or not you decide to actively engage with it and go to conventions and reprise the role for Big Finish and all those things. You know, as you say, well, Christopher Eccleston has started attending conventions now, but he is probably the actor who has stepped back into the world the least, having left it, and yet still, whenever he's willing to answer them, he is still asked questions about Doctor Who. You know, despite your best efforts, you cannot escape it. It is a job for life.
Yeah, but probably quite a fun job. You know, I'm sure it has plenty of upsides too. Yeah,
I think so. I think it's nice. I think it's just that thing that again, I think Peter Capaldi has talked about. It's just you just it doesn't cost you anything to be nice to kids. That's all it is. It's just like kids are excited to see you, or hopefully, or then those kids grow up. People are just excited to see you on the street because you're sort of like Santa Claus. You're oh my God, you're Doctor Who. So mostly people will always have a positive response to seeing you because of your association with that one role, and that can never be a bad thing, I don't think.
No, I think you're right. Just quickly before we go, do you think there is, personally, you, Morgan Jeffrey,
Mm.
there is an ideal amount of time for someone to be the Doctor, or do you think there's a what would be your point where you think now's the time to go?
Well, like I say, it's tough because I think it depends on the actor. I think it depends on the Doctor. But then I've not currently seen anyone play it too long. There have been plenty of people who haven't played it for long enough, like despite everything we said earlier,
Ignore all that. Ignore that.
But Eccleston was great. I would have loved to have, although we would have to. Let's pretend you could also have all the David Tennant stuff.
Yeah, that's
I would
fine.
love to have seen Eccleston do more, just because he was so great. Similarly, I would have loved to see Paul McGann do more. I think it would have been really interesting if Colin Baker had continued and got to see that kind of character transformation occur on screen. Sylvester McCoy was really coming into his own with his last couple of series. It would have been great to see him continue. Tom Baker, who did it for the longest time we've ever seen. I don't personally feel like he stayed too long, because you got to see all those different you got to see the light and the shade of his Doctor and all the different facets. So it's really hard to say that there's like, you should stop after 3 years, because if some of the actors who had done it for longer than that had left earlier, we would have been denied so much. So I think it's entirely up to the actor and what they feel comfortable with. But we've never seen anyone play it too long, so it's hard to put a sort of a set time and go, that's when, playing the Doctor jumps the shark or whatever. That's when you should cut off, because that's too long. It's really hard to put a kind of concrete number on it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And also, sometimes those years can encompass more or less stuff. Like Peter Capaldi didn't play the Doctor for a year within his 4 years. And, like you said, there have been other gaps, obviously some obvious gaps when the show was off the air, and also just gaps between series. Like Jodie Whittaker, isn't going to be on for, she wasn't on for all of 2019 bar a thing at the start. You still count that year because she was the Doctor, but she hasn't done it. It's also interesting to think about Jodie Whittaker, because she's obviously kind of, this rumor started about Jodie Whittaker being around for another 2 or 3 series, and it did make me think think of what we haven't seen of Jodie Whittaker. Like, I know that we I think you and I talked about this weekly, but we enjoyed her second series more than her first, and you kind of think what's her like. Because I remember when Peter Capaldi was doing his second series, I was like, wow, this is much better than his first. Finally, Peter Capaldi's finding his feet. Then the next series came after that. I was like, forget that. This is even better, And you do kind of wonder if there's a situation like that happening where, and even for people who aren't fans of the current, lineup and the way things are, you do wonder if maybe, in the next couple of years, there could be something where they're like, oh, God, I'm so glad that actually Jodie stayed and did these extra 2 years after wishing she'd been gone.
And I think the longer an actor stays, I don't think there's any set length an actor should play the role. But I think the longer they stay, the more shades and sides of their Doctor you get to see. Peter Capaldi was a very different Doctor every series. Matt Smith stayed for quite a long time, and his Doctor definitely went on an evolution. And I think we definitely, even in just 2 series, we saw slightly more depth, a slight darker side to Jodie's Doctor, who was very kind of jovial and lighthearted in the first series. So there's definitely more to be explored there. I definitely think if she does stay around for a couple more series, there's definitely the potential for her Doctor to grow and evolve.
I think here's my new controversial theory. I think the longer a Doctor stays, the better they are. I can't think of an example that doesn't quite fit that, because Paul McGann, I think, was much better in Night of the Doctor than he was in the TV movie, and that's a very long time. Real matured, like fine wine,
I think he's great in both, but I do think like Night of the Doctor is like a perfect microcosm of just how to play the Doctor. He's like, how long is that? It's like 8 minutes long or something,
yeah,
right?
It's crazy.
And he's like, and he's like absolutely sensational in all 8 minutes. It's like a perfect little gem. I definitely think, in some cases it takes a little while to find your Doctor. But I although I said, again, going back on everything I said before, although I think it's interesting that you get to see all the different facets of Tom Baker as the Doctor, I do think Tom Baker sort of peaked a couple of years into his run.
I mean, Morgan, you're just completely contradicting Morgan there. I mean,
no, I know, because
the whole thesis is unraveling.
I think he peaked around sort of series 13, series 14. That being said, what came after was still really interesting, and I'm still really glad we had it. But that boils down to personal taste, because some people love early Tom, some people love mid Tom when he's a bit more, as I say, zany and comic and looking down the camera, and some people, myself included, really enjoy the season 18 Doctor, which even Tom Baker himself doesn't particularly care for, but where he's sort of all clad in maroon, this kind of uniform, and he's slightly more somber. And I actually really love that era. So I guess it, you know, in terms of the Doctor's personality evolving, it depends on personal taste. We both said we love Series 10 Capaldi, but there's probably people out there who think that the peak of Capaldi was Series 8 when he was that slightly more dour Doctor with the short hair. So
Definitely, yeah.
as everything in Doctor Who fandom, it's all up to personal opinion and taste.
Your TARDIS mileage may vary.
Exactly.
Well, I feel like we've been chatting for even longer than usual about this. We should probably start to bring it to a close. But thank you to everyone for listening, assuming that you still are. As I say every week, there's loads of fun Doctor Who content on the radiotimes.com website. So please go and check that out. And you can check out previous editions of this podcast elsewhere as well. We talked about the Morbius Doctors last week, and we also talked about the week before whether the classic series was gone too soon. Kind of similar topic to this, but in a different way. But yeah, if you want to listen to those, that's great. In which case you'll hear me again. But until then, I've been Hugh Fullerton.
I've been Morgan Jeffrey.
And this has been me saying goodbye to you. Goodbye.